Vikings. What comes to mind? Horned helmets, brutal raids, and epic sagas, right? For centuries, these fierce Norse seafarers have captured our imagination. We see them in movies, TV shows, and video games, often portrayed as one-dimensional barbarians. But how much of what we think we know is actually true? The real story of the Vikings, uncovered through dusty manuscripts and careful archaeological digs, is far more complex and fascinating than the legends. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of myth and journey into the real world of the Vikings, exploring some of their most enduring mysteries. From their spectacular ship burials to the terrifying blood eagle ritual and the legendary Ulfberth swords, we'll separate fact from fiction. So grab your drinking horn, minus the horns, of course, because they did actually have those on their helmets, and let's set sail into the mists of Viking history. First up, let's talk about how the Vikings said farewell to their most honored dead, the ship burial. You've probably seen the dramatic image, a fallen chieftain laid to rest in his longship, pushed out to sea, and then set ablaze by a flaming arrow. It's a powerful, poetic scene, but it's almost entirely a creation of Hollywood. So, what really happened? Archaeology gives us a much clearer and arguably more impressive picture. The Vikings did indeed bury their esteemed dead with ships, but these weren't sea-bound funerals. Instead, they were elaborate graves on land. A massive trench would be dug, and the entire ship, sometimes a magnificent longship, would be placed inside. The deceased, a high-status man or woman, was then laid out in a specially built chamber on the ship's deck, surrounded by an incredible array of grave goods. We're talking about weapons, tools, jewelry, cooking utensils, and even sacrificed animals like horses, dogs, and oxen. In some cases, even human sacrifices, likely enslaved people, were included to serve their master in the afterlife. Once everything was in place, a huge earthen mound, or barrow, was constructed over the entire ship, creating a permanent, monumental landmark. Two of the most famous examples are the Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials, both discovered in Norway. The Oseberg ship, in particular, is a masterpiece of Viking art and engineering. Buried around 834 AD, it contained the remains of two women, one older and one younger, whose identities are still debated. They were surrounded by astonishingly well-preserved artifacts, including ornate wood carvings, textiles, a wagon, and sleighs. These land-based ship burials weren't just about sending someone off to Valhalla. They were powerful public statements. They demonstrated the wealth, status, and influence of the deceased's family, staking a claim to the land and creating a lasting legacy visible for miles around. So, while the flaming sea funeral is a romantic idea, the reality of a Viking ship burial was a feat of engineering and a profound ritual that anchored the dead to their homeland forever. Now, let's venture into darker territory, a topic that sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who has heard of it: the blood eagle. This ritual has become a staple of Viking portrayals in popular culture, depicted as the ultimate act of brutal, ritualistic vengeance. The description is horrifying. The victim's back is cut open, their ribs are severed from the spine, and their lungs are pulled out to create the gruesome image of wings. It's the kind of thing that perfectly fits the stereotype of the savage Viking. But did it actually happen? This is one of the most hotly debated topics among Viking historians. The evidence for the blood eagle is incredibly thin and comes almost exclusively from Old Norse poetry and sagas, which were written down hundreds of years after the Viking Age, often by Christian scribes who had their own agenda. These texts describe several famous figures, including the King of Northumbria and a son of Harald Farer, meeting their end this way. The problem is, these sources are literary, not historical. They are filled with poetic license, exaggeration, and Christian interpretations of pagan brutality. The language used to describe the ritual is often ambiguous. Some scholars argue that the descriptions might be a misunderstanding of complex poetry, or perhaps even a literary invention designed to make pagan Vikings seem as monstrous as possible. From an archaeological standpoint, there is zero evidence. We have never found a single skeleton with markings consistent with the blood eagle. And from a medical perspective, it is highly unlikely a person would survive long enough for their lungs to be pulled out and flutter like wings. They would die from blood loss or suffocation almost immediately. So, what's the verdict? Most historians today are highly skeptical. While the Vikings were certainly capable of extreme violence, the blood eagle as depicted in sagas was likely more of a literary trope than a standard practice. It was a powerful horror story, a way to convey the ultimate form of dishonorable death, but probably not something you'd actually see on a Viking battlefield. Moving on from rituals to craftsmanship, let's talk about the pinnacle of Viking Age weaponry, the Ulfberth sword. These aren't just any old swords. They were the superweapons of their time, 1,000 years ahead of their competition. Found in archaeological sites across northern Europe, these swords are marked with the inscription plus VLF BRH plus T. What made them so special? It was the steel. To make a great sword, you need steel with a high carbon content, which makes it strong, but it also needs to be free of impurities, or slag, which make it brittle. Most European blacksmiths at the time were making pretty low-quality steel, full of slag. But the Ulfberth swords were made from something called crucible steel. This process involves melting iron in a sealed container, a crucible with carbonaceous material, which allows for a much higher carbon content and purifies the metal by melting out the slag. The result was a blade that was incredibly strong, sharp, and flexible, far superior to anything else on the European battlefield. It could shatter a lesser sword and bend without breaking. But here is the mystery. The technology to make crucible steel wasn't known in Europe at that time. This high-quality steel was being produced in the Middle East and Central Asia. So how did Viking Age smiths get their hands on it? The answer lies in the Vikings' incredible trade networks. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were master traders who established routes that stretched from North America to Constantinople and deep into modern-day Russia and the Middle East. Rivers like the Volga and the Dnieper were Viking highways, connecting them to the riches of the Abbasid Caliphate. It is almost certain that the raw crucible steel ingots were imported from the East, and then forged into these magnificent blades by master smiths in the Rhineland, who then stamped them with the prestigious Ulfberth brand name. Interestingly, many imitation Ulfberth swords have also been found. These knockoffs had the famous inscription, but were made from cheap, locally produced steel. This shows just how valuable and sought after the genuine article was. Owning a real Ulfberth was a massive status symbol, a sign that you were a wealthy and powerful warrior who could afford the very best technology money could buy. It is a perfect example of how the Vikings were not isolated barbarians, but were deeply connected to a global network of trade and technology. So as we've seen, the world of the Vikings is far more nuanced than the popular image suggests. Their funeral rites were not fiery sea voyages, but monumental earthly statements of power. The terrifying blood eagle was more likely a product of literary horror than historical reality. And their most legendary swords were not forged in magical fires, but were the product of a sophisticated global trade network that brought advanced technology from the Middle East to the hands of European masters. The true history of the Vikings is a story of innovators, explorers, master craftsmen, and savvy traders as much as it is a story of warriors. By looking past the myths and digging into the archaeological and historical evidence, we find a culture that is richer, more complex, and ultimately more human. The mist of legend is slowly clearing, revealing a people whose legacy is etched not just in sagas, but in the very soil and steel they left behind. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the Viking Age. If you enjoyed debunking these myths, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which Viking mystery you find most fascinating. Until next time, stay curious.